This is the third and final video in this series on procurement planning and budgeting. In this video, we focus on the approved budget for the contract, known by its short form, ABC. The Project Procurement Management Plan and the Annual Procurement Plan were covered in the two previous videos. This video is especially connected to market scoping, which we covered in a separate video of its own. Because market scoping is the research activity that directly produces the price data used to compute the ABC you are about to learn about. If the ABC figure is wrong, it is very often because the underlying market scoping was skipped, outdated, or incomplete, so keep that earlier video in mind as we go through this one. Let's begin with the ABC. Part C, Approved Budget for the Contract, ABC. Legal Basis DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025 DPWH Department Order No. 01, Series 2026 Special Rules Audit Findings. Let's begin. Next slide. Legal basis. Definition of the ABC here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 5, quote. Approved budget for the contract, ABC, refers to the budget for the contract duly approved by the head of the procuring entity, HOPE, and the budget for the contract approved by the Sangunion through an appropriation ordinance in the case of LGUS. For multi-year contracts, the ABC shall be the total project cost reflected in the MYCA or equivalent document. For foreign-funded procurement, the ABC refers to the cost estimate approved by the foreign government or financing institution as specified in the governing agreement. End quote. This definition might look purely technical, but it is the anchor for almost every audit finding involving the approved budget for the contract. If you remember only one sentence from this entire guide, remember this. For a local government unit, the approved budget for the contract must be traceable to a specific line item inside an enacted appropriation ordinance. Next slide. Practical reading of the definition. Point 1. For a local government unit, the ABC of any contract is the budget approved by the Sangunion through an appropriation ordinance. Point 2. This is the legal anchor for nearly every ABC-related audit finding, an ABC that cannot be traced to a specific line item within an enacted appropriation. This is the third and final video in this series on procurement planning and budgeting. In this video, we focus on the approved budget for the contract, known by its short form, ABC. The Project Procurement Management Plan and the Annual Procurement Plan were covered in the two previous videos. This video is especially connected to market scoping, which we covered in a separate video of its own. Because market scoping is the research activity that directly produces the price data used to compute the ABC you are about to learn about. If the ABC figure is wrong, it is very often because the underlying market scoping was skipped, outdated, or incomplete, so keep that earlier video in mind as we go through this one. Let's begin with the ABC. Part C, Approved Budget for the Contract, ABC. Legal Basis DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025 DPWH Department Order No. 01, Series 2026 Special Rules Audit Findings. Let's begin. Next slide. Legal basis. Definition of the ABC here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 5, quote. Approved budget for the contract, ABC, refers to the budget for the contract duly approved by the head of the procuring entity, HOPE, and the budget for the contract approved by the Sangunion through an appropriation ordinance in the case of LGUS. For multi-year contracts, the ABC shall be the total project cost reflected in the MYCA or equivalent document. For foreign-funded procurement, the ABC refers to the cost estimate approved by the foreign government or financing institution as specified in the governing agreement. End quote. This definition might look purely technical, but it is the anchor for almost every audit finding involving the approved budget for the contract. If you remember only one sentence from this entire guide, remember this. For a local government unit, the approved budget for the contract must be traceable to a specific line item inside an enacted appropriation ordinance. Next slide. Practical reading of the definition. Point 1. For a local government unit, the ABC of any contract is the budget approved by the Sangunion through an appropriation ordinance. Point 2. This is the legal anchor for nearly every ABC-related audit finding, an ABC that cannot be traced to a specific line item within an enacted appropriation ordinance has no valid legal basis. Point 3. For infrastructure projects specifically, 2 DPWH department orders govern exactly how that ABC figure must be computed and kept current. Department Order No. 30, Series of 2025, and Department Order No. 01, Series of 2026. Both are treated in full in this part. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of practical reading of the definition. Next slide. Part C DPWH Department Order Number 30, Series 2025. Guidelines in the preparation of POW and ABC. The foundational DPWH issuance governing how every infrastructure ABC is built, component by component. Let's begin. Next slide. Purpose and design basis. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 30, Series of 2025. Quote. In line with the department's quality policy to deliver right projects at the right cost, the following policies, guidelines, and procedures relative to the preparation of cost estimates such as the Program of Works, POW, and approved budget for the contract, ABC, are hereby established. The POW and ABC, together with the detailed unit price analysis, DUPA, shall be prepared based on the design plans for the project which has been duly approved by the authorized officials in accordance with existing regulations. All pay items to be incorporated in the POW and ABC shall conform to the most recent editions of the DPWH standard specifications for highways, bridges, and airports, Volume 2, DPWH standard specifications for public works structures, Volume 3, and latest issuances on standard specifications. End quote. This department order exists because the Department of Public Works and Highways wanted a single, standard method for building a cost estimate, so that any two competent engineers working from the same approved design plans would arrive at essentially the same approved budget for the contract. Next slide. The ABC equation under DO 30.1. Section I of DO 30 states plainly, the ABC shall consist of both direct cost and indirect cost. Point 2. Direct cost has three components: the material component, the labor component, and the equipment component. Point 3. Indirect cost has three components: overhead, contingencies, and miscellaneous, OCM, expenses, contractor's profit, CP, and the value added tax, VAT. Point 4. Section 2 adds one more layer on top of the ABC to produce the POW, the engineering and administrative overhead, EAO. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of the ABC equation under DO 30. Next slide. Direct cost, material component. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 30, Series 2025, Section IA1. Quote. For material component, the price of materials to be used in doing the works called for shall include, inter alia, the following: 1.1 cost at source, base price, including processing, crushing, stockpiling, loading, royalties, local taxes, construction and or maintenance of haul roads, etc. 1.2 expenses for hauling from source to project site. 1.3 handling expenses. 1.4 storage expenses. 1.5 allowance for wastages and or losses, not to exceed 5% of materials requirement. 1.6 allowance for swell, shrinkage of materials, e.g., sand, gravel, subbase, base course, etc. End quote. Notice how comprehensive this list is. It is not just the sticker price of cement or gravel. It includes royalties, local taxes, hauling, handling, storage, and even an allowance for materials that are wasted or that swell and shrink during construction. Leaving any of these out understates the true cost of the material. Next slide. Direct cost, labor component. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 30, Series 2025, Section IA2. Quote. For labor component, the cost of labor shall include the following: 2.1 Salaries and wages, as authorized by the Department of Labor and Employment, DOLE, issued by the DPWH through a memorandum. 2.2 Fringe benefits, such as vacation and sick leaves, benefits under the Workmen's Compensation Act, GSIS and or SSS contributions, allowances, 13th month pay, bonuses, etc. End quote. This component is deliberately tied to two external, independently set standards: the wage rate set by the Department of Labor and Employment, and mandatory benefits such as Social Security and 13th month pay. An engineer cannot simply invent a labor rate, it must trace back to these external references. Next slide. Direct cost, equipment component, 1 of 2. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 30, Series 2025, Section IA 3.1. Quote. Rental rates of equipment shall be based on the current Association of Carriers and Equipment Lessors, ACEL, Equipment Guidebook approved for use by the DPWH. Rental rates of equipment not indicated in the ACEL Equipment Guidebook shall be taken from the rental rates prepared by the Bureau of Equipment, BOE. For simplicity in computation, the operated rental rates are preferred over the bare rental rates, as the former includes operators' wages, fringe benefits, fuel, oil, lubricants, and equipment maintenance. The make, model, and capacity of the equipment to be utilized should be indicated in the DUPA end quote. The key phrase here is operated rental rates, which already include the operator's wages, fuel, and maintenance, as opposed to bare rental rates, which do not. Using the wrong one of these two rate types is a common and easily overlooked source of error in a cost estimate. Next slide. Direct cost, equipment component, 2 of 2. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IA 3.2 and 3.3. Quote. 3.2 Mobilization, demobilization pay item shall be calculated based on the equipment requirements of the project. The cost of mobilization and demobilization shall not exceed 1% of the estimated direct cost, EDC, of all program pay items that are civil works in nature. However, in exceptional circumstances where the cost exceeds the prescribed 1% threshold, the DUPA reflecting the actual computed cost shall be approved, duly signed, by the approving authority, and a copy submitted to the BOC within 15 calendar days from the date of approval. 3.3 Permits and clearances pay item shall include the cost of securing MMDA permit, LGU permits, Bureau of Fire Protection clearance, and other government fees. End quote. The 1% cap on mobilization and demobilization cost is a specific, numeric ceiling that is easy to check during an audit. If the actual mobilization cost genuinely needs to exceed that 1%, the rule does not forbid it, but it does require a specific extra layer of approval and a mandatory report to the Bureau of Construction within 15 calendar days. Next slide. Indirect cost, overhead, contingencies, miscellaneous, 1 of 2. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IB 1.1. Quote. Overhead expense shall be 7% to 11% of the EDC, and shall include the following: 1.1.1 Engineering and Administrative Supervision, 1.1.2 Transportation Allowances, 1.1.3 Office expenses, e.g., for the rental of office and quarters, service vehicle, office equipment and supplies, power and water consumption, communication and maintenance. 1.1.4 Premium on Contractors' All-Risk Insurance, CARI. 1.1.5 Financing costs such as a. Premium on bid security, b. Premium on performance security, c. Premium on surety for advance payment, d. Premium on warranty security, 1 year. End quote. Overhead is not profit. It is the real cost of running the contractor's on-site and off-site administration for the duration of the project, everything from office rent to insurance premiums and financing costs for the various required securities. Next slide. Indirect cost, overhead, contingencies, miscellaneous, 2 of 2. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IB 1.2 and 1.3. Quote. 1.2 Contingencies shall be 0.5% to 3% of the EDC, and shall include expenses for monthly, weekly meetings, coordination meetings with other stakeholders. Billboards, excluding project billboard, signboard required by the DPWH and other government agencies such as the Commission on Audit and DENR, which shall be programmed under Part B, other general requirements, stages during groundbreaking and inauguration ceremonies, and unforeseen, other events relative thereto. 1.3 Miscellaneous expenses shall be 0.5% to 1% of the EDC, and shall include laboratory tests for quality control and plan preparation. End quote. Contingencies and miscellaneous expenses are deliberately kept small, 0.5% to 3%, and 0.5% to 1% respectively, precisely because they are meant to cover minor, hard to itemize costs, not to become a hidden slush fund inside the cost estimate. Next slide. Indirect cost, contractor's profit. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IB2. Quote. Contractor's profit, CP, shall be 8% of the EDC for projects with EDC of above Philippine pesos 5 million and 10% for projects with EDC of Philippine pesos 5 million and below. For ease of calculation, the markup percentages for OCM and CP, based on the EDC, shall be specified in the following table. End quote. The table you are about to hear is one of the most frequently used references in this entire guide, so listen carefully to the 4 brackets and how the percentages shrink as the estimated direct cost grows larger. Next slide. OCM and CP markup table, exact, section IB2. This table reads as follows. Estimated direct cost, EDC, up to Philippine pesos 5 million, OCM, percent of EDC, 15, CP, percent of EDC, 10, total, percent of EDC, 25. Next row. Estimated direct cost, EDC, above Philippine pesos 5 million to Philippine pesos 50 million, OCM, percent of EDC, 12, CP, percent of EDC, 8, total, percent of EDC, 20. Next row. Estimated direct cost, EDC, above Philippine pesos 50 million to Philippine pesos 150 million, OCM, percent of EDC, 10, CP, percent of EDC, 8, total, percent of EDC, 18. Next row. Estimated direct cost, EDC, above Philippine pesos 150 million, OCM, percent of EDC, 8, CP, percent of EDC, 8, total, percent of EDC, 16. Use this table as a direct lookup reference whenever you need to check OCM and CP markup table, exact, sec. I, B.2. Next slide. Reading this table correctly. Point 1. The table is a single, combined lookup for the entire contract's estimated direct cost. It is not applied separately to each pay item, and, as explained later in Part E of this guide, it is not applied separately to each individual project inside a clustered or lot-based contract either. Point 2. Notice the built-in economy of scale. OCM drops from 15% to 8% as the EDC bracket rises, while CP drops from 10% to 8%. A larger, well-consolidated contract is expected to carry a proportionally lighter indirect cost burden. Point 3. The applicability of OCM and CP for pay items under Facilities for the Engineer, Part A of the Program of Works, and other general requirements, Part B, are set forth in Annexes A and B of DO 30. Series 2025, which specify, item by item, whether OCM and/or CP apply. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of reading this table correctly. Next slide. Indirect cost, value-added tax. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IB3. Quote. Value-added tax, VAT, component, shall be a percentage of the sum of the EDC, OCM, and CP. The applicable rate shall be based on the latest guidelines issued by the DPWH Finance Service, in adherence to the provisions of the National Internal Revenue Code and its amendments, wherein the Bureau of Internal Revenue, BIR, is mandated to give effect to and administer the supervisory and police powers conferred to it by the said code or other laws. End quote. Notice that value-added tax is computed last, as a percentage of the sum of the direct cost, the overhead, contingencies and miscellaneous expenses, and the contractor's profit combined, not as a percentage of the direct cost alone. Applying it too early in the computation will understate the total. Next slide. The Program of Works, adding the EAO here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section 2. Quote. In addition to the direct cost and indirect cost, the POW shall also include the Engineering and Administrative Overhead, EAO. Percentage to be used for the EAO shall be in accordance with the latest existing policy on the breakdown of the allocation of the authorized deductions from project-related expenses. To be used for Engineering and Administrative Overhead, EAO, and Maintenance and Other Operating Expenses, MOOE, of the DPWH budget. End quote. This is the one extra layer that turns an approved budget for the contract into a complete program of works. The Engineering and Administrative Overhead percentage is not fixed by this particular order. It is governed by a separate, continuously updated Department of Public Works and Highways policy, so always check for the current rate. Next slide. Standard forms, realistic pricing, and supersession. Point 1. Section 3. The prescribed format for preparing and processing the POW, ABC, and DUPA, including instructions and corresponding signatories, is attached as Annex C and downloadable from the DPWH intranet. Point 2. Exact closing instruction. The DPWH implementing offices shall continuously update their information, statistics on market prices of all construction inputs and use only unit prices that are realistic based on valid up-to-date information and references. In contrast to guesswork and haphazard pricing. Point 3. Quoting directly. All assumptions utilized in the preparation of the POW and ABC shall be explicitly stated in the supporting cost analyses and/or any accompanying documents. Point 4. Do 30, Series 2025 superseded Department Order Number 197, Series of 2016, and Department Order Number 133, Series of 2019, and has been enforced in the preparation of cost estimates beginning SI 2026. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of standard forms, realistic pricing, and supersession. Next slide. Part C DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026. Updating and monitoring PO with ABC using the latest CMPD. Issued to keep every FY 2026 POW and ABC current with the latest construction materials price data before procurement begins. Let's begin. Next slide. Purpose. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series of 2026. Quote. In order to ensure the reasonableness and consistency of project cost estimates, and to promote uniformity in the preparation and updating of the Programme of Works, POW. Approved budget for the contract, ABC. And other related cost estimation documents for projects proposed under the revised National Expenditure Programme, NEP, for FY 2026 and subsequently authorised under the General Appropriations Act, GAA, of FY 2026. All implementing officers are hereby directed to strictly adopt and comply with the following guidelines prior to the commencement of any procurement activities. End quote. This order exists to solve one very specific, very practical problem. Cost estimates prepared many months earlier, when a project was still just a proposal, can quietly go stale by the time actual bidding is ready to begin, because construction material prices keep moving. Next slide. Why this order was issued. This order exists because prices move between budget proposal and procurement. A project's cost estimate is typically first prepared many months before actual bidding, when the proposed NEP is drafted. By the time the GAA is enacted and procurement can begin, the CMPD may already have been updated one or more times. Do 01, Series 2026 closes this gap by making it mandatory to revalidate the project and recompute the POW and ABC using the latest available CMPD before any procurement activity commences for FY 2026 projects. This is an important point to remember when working with why this order was issued. Next slide. Validation of projects. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 1.1.1 and 1.1.2. Quote. 1.1.1 All implementing officers, IOs, shall conduct a validation of each project's location, station limits and/or coordinates, scope of work, and physical targets. Such validation shall be undertaken to prevent project duplication or overlapping and to ensure the technical, operational, and financial feasibility of project implementation. 1.1.2 A certificate of validation shall be prepared and issued as evidence of compliance. For RO/DO projects, issued by the Planning and Design Division, Section Chief. For UPMO cluster projects, issued by the project manager concerned, subject to the concurrence of the respective heads of the IOs. End quote. Before anyone even touches the numbers, this order requires a basic sanity check on the project itself. Is this really where we think it is? Does it really cover the scope we think it covers? And, critically, are we sure this is not accidentally duplicating another project already in the pipeline? Next slide. Recalculation of unit costs, material price rule. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 1.2.2. Quote. A. For materials included in the latest CMPD, the corresponding unit prices indicated therein shall be adopted, with the inclusion of additional costs for hauling, handling, and storage, where duly applicable. A certification shall be prepared and issued by the Planning and Design Division, Section Chief or Project Manager, with concurrence of the head of the IO. B. For materials not included in the latest CMPD. The unit price shall be determined based on the median of canvas price quotations from at least three legitimate and duly recognized or accredited suppliers, in accordance with the latest applicable guidelines on CMPD utilization. End quote. This is a two-branch rule, and both branches matter. If the material is listed in the current price data, use that price, plus any real additional hauling or storage cost. If it is not listed, do not guess. Take the median of at least 3 real supplier quotations instead. Next slide. Labor and equipment unit cost. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 1.2.4. Quote. The unit costs for labor and equipment shall be derived from the prevailing prescribed labor rates, PLR, at the time of preparation of the cost estimates, and the prescribed equipment rental rates, PERR, issued through memorandum dated October 13, 2025, respectively. For equipment not included in the PERR, use the 27th edition of the ACEL Equipment Guidebook, 2025. Notwithstanding the foregoing, all implementing offices shall strictly comply with the most recent and applicable department policies governing the adoption and utilization of PLR and PERR. End quote. Notice the specific, dated references here, the Labor Rate Memorandum and the Equipment Rental Memorandum, both dated October 13, 2025, and the 27th edition of the Equipment Guidebook. Using an older edition of any of these three would itself be a compliance gap. Next slide. Application of the 12% VAT. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 1.2.6. Quote. After ensuring that all labor costs, equipment rental rates, and material unit prices are exclusive of VAT, 12% VAT shall be applied to the total unit cost of labor, equipment, materials, OCM, and CP, pursuant to the clarification from Finance Service, unnumbered memorandum dated July 15, 2025. Regarding the guidance on tax requirements affecting the application of 12% VAT on civil works. End quote. The order is explicit about the correct order of operations here. First, strip value added tax out of every individual input so you are working with clean, tax-exclusive figures. And only then apply the 12% rate to the properly combined total. Next slide. Updating the POW, computing total project cost. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 1.3.2. Quote. Without altering the project's intended physical targets, as authorized in the GAA FY 2026, and the pay item and corresponding quantities indicated in the original approved plans and specifications. The total construction cost shall be computed, i.e., cost of labor, equipment, materials, OCM, CP, and VAT. The appropriate engineering and administrative overhead, EAO, percentage shall then be added to the total construction cost following the latest policy on the application of EAO. End quote. The phrase to hold onto here is without altering the project's intended physical targets. This exercise is about updating prices, not about quietly redesigning or resizing the project while nobody is looking. Next slide. Documentation required before approval of the updated PO with ABC.1. A. POW and ABC. Including both the original, using the prevailing CMPD at the time of preparation of cost estimates for the proposed NEP, and the updated versions, using the latest CMPD. Point 2. B. Complete documentary requirements per the checklist for processing and approval of POW and ABC, per the latest document tracking system, DOTS, policy. Point 3. C. Annex A. Certificate of validation, issued by the Planning and Design Division, Section Chief and duly concurred by the head of the Implementing Office. Point 4. D. Annex B. Certification that the latest CMPD was duly applied in the updating of project costs, issued by the Planning and Design Division, Section Chief and duly concurred by the head of the Implementing Office. Point 5. E. Annex C. Comparative matrix of unit costs of pay items, original versus updated, with remarks clearly identifying which materials had their prices updated. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of documentation required before approval of the updated POW, ABC. Next slide. Weekly reporting to the Bureau of Construction. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order Number 01, Series 2026, Section 2.1.2. Quote. To ensure strict compliance with this department order, all IOs shall submit the said comparative matrix, Annex C, and a summary report, Annex D, on the updating of project costs, including the original and updated POW, ABC, DUPA, and hauling cost analyses, or any material price derivation, to the Bureau of Construction, BOC, on a weekly basis. This submission shall serve as the official basis for monitoring, verification, and oversight, thereby ensuring that all project cost updates are properly documented, justified, and aligned with approved policies and guidelines. End quote. A weekly reporting cycle is unusually frequent for a government cost control mechanism, which tells you how seriously the Department of Public Works and Highways is treating the risk of stale, unvalidated cost estimates slipping through during this particular budget cycle. Next slide. Responsibility of the Bids and Awards Committee. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from DPWH Department Order No. 01, Series 2026, Section 2.2.1. Quote. A. The BAC shall require the submission of the Certificate of Validation, Annex A, and the certification on the utilization of the latest CMPD, Annex B, confirming that the project has been duly validated and that the latest CMPD was applied in the determination of the ABC, prior to the commencement of any procurement activities. B. In cases where the office concerned fails to provide the required certifications, the BAC shall return the ABC to the said office for compliance prior to commencement of any procurement activities. End quote. This turns the Bids and Awards Committee into the final gatekeeper. Even if an implementing office forgets or skips the validation and certification steps, the committee is required to catch that gap and send the approved budget for the contract back for compliance before procurement can proceed. Next slide. Sanctions and supersession. Point 1. Quoting directly, failure to comply with the above provisions shall be subject to legal and administrative sanctions in accordance with the existing laws, civil service rules, and other department policies and issuances. Point 2. Quoting directly, this order shall supersede Department Order No. 210, Series of 2025, and shall take effect immediately upon issuance. Point 3. 4 annexes are enclosed. Annex A, Certificate of Validation. Annex B, Certification on Utilization of the latest CMPD. Annex C, Comparative Matrix of Unit Costs of Pay Items. Annex D, Summary Report on the Updating of Project Costs. Point 4. Signed by the DPWH Secretary and dated January 7, 2026. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of sanctions and supersession. Next slide. How do 30, Series 2025 and do 01, Series 2026 work together? Point 1. Do 30, Series 2025 is the standing, general framework. It defines what goes into the ABC, material, labor, equipment, OCM, CP, VAT, and fixes the percentage brackets that apply for the life of the policy. Point 2. Do 01, Series 2026 is a time-bound compliance layer on top of Do 30. It does not change the components or the percentage brackets, but it requires every FY 2026 project to rerun that same Do 30 computation using the current, latest CMPD, PLR, and PERR before procurement can begin. Point 3. In practice, apply DO30's structure and percentages every time. Apply to 01's validation, recosting, and documentation steps specifically for FY 2026 budget cycle projects. And treat the underlying discipline, recheck the CMPD before finalizing any ABC, as a standing best practice for every fiscal year going forward. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of how Do 30, Series 2025 and Do 01, Series 2026 work together. Next slide. ABC Threshold, Small Value Procurement. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 34.1. Quote. Small Value Procurement, SVP, is a mode of procurement whereby the procuring entity requests for the submission of at least 3 price quotations for goods not available in the PSDBM, infrastructure projects, and consulting services. The receipt of one quotation is sufficient to proceed with the evaluation of bidders, provided that the amount involved does not exceed 2 million pesos, Philippine pesos 2 million.00. Subject to the periodic review of the threshold amount as may be deemed appropriate by the GPPB. End quote. Remember this number, 2 million pesos, as the general national ceiling, but pay close attention to the very next slide, because local government units actually use a lower, graduated set of thresholds depending on their classification. Next slide. SVP thresholds by LGU classification, Section 34.2. This table reads as follows. LGU classification, First Class, Province, Philippine pesos 2 million. City, Philippine pesos 2 million. Municipality, Philippine pesos 400,000. Next row. LGU classification, second class. Province, Philippine pesos 2 million. City, Philippine pesos 2 million. Municipality, Philippine pesos 400,000. Next row. LGU classification, third class. Province, Philippine pesos 2 million. City, Philippine pesos 1,600,000. Municipality, Philippine pesos 400,000. Next row. LGU classification, fourth class. Province, Philippine pesos 1,600,000. City, Philippine pesos 1,200,000. Municipality, Philippine pesos 200,000. Next row. LGU classification, fifth class. Province, Philippine pesos 1,200,000. City, Philippine pesos 800,000. Municipality, Philippine pesos 200,000. Use this table as a direct lookup reference whenever you need to check SVP thresholds by LGU classification, Sec. 34.2. Next slide. Barangay threshold and application. Point 1. For barangays, the small value procurement ceiling is fixed at Philippine pesos 100,000.00, regardless of the classification of the municipality or city to which the barangay belongs. Point 2. Any ABC exceeding the applicable ceiling in the classification table requires competitive bidding rather than small value procurement, unless another specific mode under Section 26 properly applies. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of barangay threshold and application. Next slide. ABC adjustment after failed bidding. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 35.1.1. Quote. The BAC shall conduct mandatory review of the terms, conditions, specifications, and cost estimates. Thereafter, the BAC may revise and agree on the technical, legal, and financial eligibility requirements and technical specifications or terms of reference, and if necessary, adjust the ABC, subject to the required approvals. However, the ABC cannot be increased by more than 20% of the ABC for the last failed bidding. End quote. The 20% figure here is a hard ceiling, and it is measured against the ABC used in the most recent failed bidding, not against whatever the very first original estimate happened to be. This distinction matters if a project has already gone through more than one failed bidding cycle. Next slide. ABC for multi-year contracts. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 9.1 and 9.1.4. Quote. The MYCA is issued by the DBM for multi-year locally funded projects in order to authorize the procuring entity to enter into multi-year contracts. The total project cost reflected in the MYCA or its equivalent document shall be the basis or reference for the ABC of the procurement contract. LGUs shall secure any equivalent document issued by their respective Sanggunian authorizing them to enter into multi-year contracts, as may be applicable. End quote. For a multi-year contract, the usual single-year appropriation ordinance is not enough on its own. There must be a specific multi-year authorization, called the multi-year contractual authority at the national level, or an equivalent Sanggunian authorization for a local government unit. Next slide. Documentation required to support the ABC. Point 1. Infrastructure, signed price canvas sheet or CMPD reference, preliminary program of works, quantity estimate worksheet, DUPA showing material, labor, equipment breakdown Purdue 30, Series 2025. Point 2. For FY 2026 projects specifically, the Certificate of Validation, Annex A, and CMPD Utilization Certification, Annex B, required by DO 01, Series 2026, plus the Comparative Matrix, Annex C, if the cost estimate was updated. Point 3. Goods, at least 3 supplier quotations, or the PSDBM catalog price printout. Point 4. Consulting services, terms of reference plus a cost build-up of professional rates, staffing, and duration. Point 5. Multi-year, the MYCA or equivalent Sanggunian authorization document. Point 6. Post-failed bidding increases, BAC mandatory review documentation showing the 20% ceiling computation. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of documentation required to support the ABC. Next slide. ABC checklist. Point 1. Traceable to a specific line item within an enacted appropriation ordinance. Point 2. consistent across the PPMP, the APP, and the bidding documents. Point 3. For infrastructure, built up using the DO30 Series 2025 material, labor, equipment, OCM, CP, VAT structure. Point 4. For FY 2026 infrastructure, re-validated and recosted against the latest CMPD PDU 01 Series 2026, with annexes AD on file. Point 5. Does not exceed the applicable SVP ceiling if SVP is the stated mode. Point 6. Any post-failed bidding increase stays within 20% of the last failed bidding's ABC. Point 7. For multi-year projects, matches the MYCA or equivalent Sangunian authorization. Point 8. Shows no signs of contract splitting or incorrect per project OCM, CP bracketing, C Part E. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of ABC checklist. Next slide. Finding number 1. ABC not traceable to any enacted appropriation. The ABC cannot be traced to any specific line item within the Sangunian's enacted appropriation ordinance, meaning it has no valid legal basis under the statutory definition. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 5. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 2. ABC based on outdated CMPD data. The DUPA supporting an infrastructure ABC used CMPD data from a period already superseded by a newer release, resulting in an understated or overstated ABC, and no revalidation was conducted as required for FY 2026 projects. The legal basis for this finding is DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, DPWH Department Order No. 01, Series 2026. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 3. Missing Certificate of Validation or CMPD certification. Procurement activities commenced without the Certificate of Validation, Annex A, or the certification on the utilization of the latest CMPD, Annex B, required before the BAC may proceed. The legal basis for this finding is DPWH Department Order No. 01, Series 2026, Section 2.1.1, C, D, and Section 2.2.1. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 4. OCM, CP bracket misapplied. The DUPA applied the OCM and CP percentages for a smaller estimated direct cost bracket than the contract's true, consolidated EDC actually falls under, inflating the ABC beyond what DO30 Series 2025 allows. The legal basis for this finding is DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IB2. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 5. Mobilization, demobilization cost exceeds the 1% cap without approval. The DUPA reflects a mobilization and demobilization cost exceeding 1% of the estimated direct cost, without the required approval by the delegated authority or the mandatory submission to the Bureau of Construction within 15 calendar days. The legal basis for this finding is DPWH Department Order No. 30, Series 2025, Section IA 3.2. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 6. ABC increased beyond the 20% ceiling after failed bidding. Following 2 failed biddings, the BAC adjusted the ABC upward by more than 20% of the ABC used in the last failed bidding. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 35.1.1. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 7. ABC exceeds the applicable SVP ceiling. A municipality used SVP for a project with an ABC exceeding the ceiling fixed for its classification, when competitive bidding should have applied instead. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations section 34.2. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 8. Inconsistent ABC across PPMP, APP, and bidding documents. The ABC shown in the bidding documents does not match the ABC in the APP or the underlying PPMP, without any documented explanation or revised APP. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations section 7.7.1 F and section 7.7.2 H. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Before we close, we will cover a few special topics on clustered and lot-based contracts, which is where many engineers make avoidable computation errors involving the ABC. Part E. Special topics, clustered and lot-based contracts. The two computation errors engineers make most often when several projects are procured together as one contract, and the correct approach to each. Let's begin. Next slide. What is a clustered or lot-based contract? Point 1. A procuring entity may combine two or more separate projects, often in different locations, into a single procurement package, commonly called a cluster, a lot, or a program, and bid them out as one contract to one winning contractor. Point 2. This is done deliberately, for efficiency. Fewer bidding processes to run, larger contracts that attract more capable contractors, and, as shown in Part C, a potentially more favorable OCM and contractor's profit bracket once the individual project costs are combined into a single, larger estimated direct cost. Point 3. Because the projects are combined precisely to be handled as one undertaking, two figures must now be computed for the whole cluster, not simply added up from the individual components, the total contract duration, and the total ABC. Both are common sources of error, covered in this part. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of what is a clustered or lot-based contract. Next slide. The work duration error. The work duration error, a very common mistake. Adding up each project's individual duration is usually wrong for a clustered contract. Keep this specific number pattern in mind, 20 plus 25 equaling 45, because it is exactly the kind of arithmetic that feels obviously correct at first glance. Which is precisely what makes it such a persistent and hard to catch error in practice. Next slide. The legal basis for determining contract duration. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12009, Section 8.2.1, J. Quote. In the preparation of the bidding documents, the procuring entity shall make an estimate of the actual number of working days required to complete the project through PERT and CPM or PDM analysis of the project activities and corrected for holidays and weekends. Likewise, the procuring entity shall make an estimate of the number of rainy or unworkable days, based on the records of the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration, PAGASA, which shall be made the basis of the total contract time. End quote. Hold on to this citation, because it is the legal foundation for everything explained in the rest of this section on clustered projects. The law does not say add up the durations, it says build a proper schedule network and find the true critical path. Next slide. Why the law points away from simple addition. Point 1. Notice that the Implementing Rules and Regulations requires a PERT and CPM, or Precedence Diagram Method, PDM, analysis of the project activities, not a simple arithmetic sum of separately computed project durations. Point 2. PERT, CPM and PDM are scheduling techniques built specifically to show which activities can run in parallel, concurrently, and which activities must run in sequence because one depends on the completion of another. Point 3. When two clustered projects are genuinely independent of each other, different sites, different scopes, no shared critical resource, a proper PERT CPM network will show them as parallel paths, not a single chain sequence. Simply adding the two individual durations effectively assumes total sequential dependency that, in most clustered contracts, does not actually exist. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of why the law points away from simple addition. Next slide. Wrong versus right. The 20-day and 25-day example. The naive, usually wrong, approach. Project 1 duration, 20 calendar days. Project 2 duration, 25 calendar days. Total contract duration equals 20 plus 25 equals 45 calendar days. Assumes the contractor works on Project 2 only after Project 1 is entirely finished. Silently assumes the contractor has only one crew and one set of equipment for the whole cluster. The correct, PERT CPM, approach. Map both projects as parallel activities in a single network diagram. If independent sites and independent crews, equipment. Contract duration equals the longer of the two equals 25 calendar days. If a specific resource must be shared between sites, add only the actual extra time that resource sharing requires, shown on the network, not the whole second duration. Document the assumption, parallel or resource shared, explicitly in the cost estimate, per Do 30, Series 2025's requirement that assumptions be stated comparing these two columns side by side is the fastest way to spot which approach a given cost estimate actually followed. Next slide. The governing principle to apply. Point 1. Ask first, can the two or more clustered projects genuinely be worked on at the same time, by separate crews and separate equipment, without one waiting for the other? If yes, the overall duration is governed by the longest single component, the critical path, not the sum. Point 2. Ask second, is there a real, identifiable resource or sequencing constraint, for example, only one specialized paving machine available for both sites? If so, add only the specific additional days that constraint truly requires, established through the PERT CPM or PDM network, not the full duration of the second project. Point 3. Never default to simple addition merely because it feels conservative or safe. An inflated contract duration understates contractor productivity expectations. Can distort the OCM and overhead computation, which is time-related in part, and gives the contractor an unwarranted extension of time, exposing the estimate to audit question. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of the governing principle to apply. Next slide. The OCM, CP bracket error. The OCM, contractor's profit bracket error. Applying the Do 30, Series 2025 markup table separately to each clustered project, instead of to the combined contract, is also a very common mistake. This error is subtle because each individual calculation, taken on its own, looks perfectly correct. The mistake only becomes visible when you step back and compare the sum of the parts against the correct calculation on the combined whole. Next slide. Worked example, why the combined EDC matters. This table reads as follows. Approach, wrong. Bracket per project. Project 1 EDC, Philippine pesos 3 million. Project 2 EDC, Philippine pesos 4 million. Bracket used, both fall, up to 5M, 25% each. Result, total markup equals 25% times 7 million equals Philippine pesos 1 million. Thank you for watching all 3 videos in this series. This is the third and final video